All right. We're going to now ask Mr. Gage another question. It's concerning something you briefly mentioned, pulverized concrete and metal decking. Mr. Gage, you claim that the preponderance of dust from the collapses indicates controlled demolition. Shouldn't one expect this from the crushing of a natural collapse?
Well, let's see what we would expect from a natural collapse. Well, from explosions first. Like this eruption, volcanic eruption in the Tongan Sea. Upward, outward, arching streamers. Violent symmetry, evocative of the geometry of fireworks. Thick pyroclastic clouds with intense heat causing the cauliflower-like formations from that intense heat and known explosions. Is there any similarity in the development of the destruction of the Twin Towers, the North Tower, which you see on the left? Again, upward, outward arching streamers, thick pyroclastic clouds, intense heat causing that. Does it look to you like a gravitational collapse? Is there enough similarity in these two different systems to warrant a new investigation into the possibility of explosive controlled demolition? Particularly since it looks like one, and since no fire has ever brought down a steel frame skyscraper. Again, where is all the concrete? We don't see it at the base. It's spread throughout lower Manhattan in a 4 to 12 inch thick blanket. 30% of this dust, by tests, is composed of finely ground concrete, 100 micron particles, like talcum powder. Where's the metal decking? 220 acres of thick metal decking. I found it in the World Trade Center dust. It comes up to a magnet. Galvanized iron particles like metal filings. 10,000 file cabinets missing. And the victims, 2,749 of them, but 1,000 of them are still missing. Pieces small enough to fit into a test tube, 6,000. And
Richard,
yet 786 bone fragments are found on top of a building 500 feet away, 250 feet away, high-rise that is 500 feet tall. How did they get there? How were they so small?
Time is up. All right. Let's see. Now we're going to go to Chris Mohr for a response.
Well, Richard, every physicist and every engineer I've ever talked to, with the exception of Gordon Ross, insists that there was plenty of energy to gradually pulverize 3 to 4 inch layers of concrete on every floor. We ask ourselves how all this dust, and I have this huge dust cloud that I have up here as a little bit of a demonstration, which is a mixture of concrete and gypsum and that sort of thing. How could all of that have happened from a simple natural collapse? I come back to gravity again. First of all, you don't have to pulverize the concrete on every floor as you go. You can have it keep getting smashed and smashed and smashed and smashed until it's fully pulverized, and then it comes out. I'd like to mention also that rescue workers walked on cool rubble right after the end of the collapse. They were out there before Building 7 even collapsed. I don't know how 4,500 degree nanothermites could possibly be consistent with that fact. Pyroclastic clouds that you talk about in your comparison with volcanoes, it kills entire villages. And the one in Indonesia, I think it was in 2009, is a really good example of that. Thousands of pyroclastic cloud survivors needed ventilators. It was a terrible thing for those people because they were breathing 1,100 to 1,400 degree air. Many of them died. Yes, this does look like the kind of thing. This is a real pyroclastic cloud. In the daytime, it looks like what happened at the World Trade Center, but it is not. If you look at it at night, you can see it is red hot. It is glowing. Where are the people who are covered in fresh dust and debris from 9/11 who had to go onto ventilators by the thousands? That didn't happen. I've hypothesized that the 9/11 dust might be warm, perhaps a little bit warmer because of the fact that it was mixed in with some of the floors with fire. And there is someone who actually just told me as an eyewitness recently that was the case, that it was warm dust and not just cool dust. The other thing that I also wonder about, Richard, is just the question of, here you have all these people, for one thing, that are just kind of running through. But we don't have reports of that kind of a problem, and we have paper all over the place. How is that consistent with millions of pieces of paper flying all over the place after this collapse? It's not consistent with 4,500 degree nanothermites.
Well, it's clear that the explosives sent paper flying everywhere, and nanothermite can be engineered as an explosive, but things happen in stages, explosions and then paper flying everywhere. Relative to the energy required to pulverize concrete, there is a massive amount of gravitational potential energy in the building, about 100,000 kilowatt hours. But there's no mechanism to pulverize the concrete. You can have all the potential gravitational in the Niagara Falls, but you don't get electricity unless you have a generator.
I don't need electricity. All I need is gravity. 180 million pounds coming down at 100 miles an hour. That pulverizes 3 inches of concrete real fast.
But it doesn't pulverize metal decking into fine metal filings.
I would say it does. I would say there's more than enough gravitational power to do all of those things. No doubt in my mind about that.
We'll have to agree to disagree on this.
Okay.
Maybe we can agree for another debate sometime in the future to get to some other questions. But in the meanwhile, we still have some here. Let's go again to Richard Gage with this one. Eyewitnesses of explosions in the Twin Towers. Mr. Gage, you claim that people heard explosions during the collapses, and this indicates controlled demolition. Wouldn't this be happening as the building came down during a natural collapse as well, random explosions?
Well, indeed, we'd expect some explosions in a fire or in a gravitational collapse, but we've already ruled out gravitational collapse. What we're now looking at is the witnesses, 118 of them, that reported orally to the Chief Fire Commissioner, Thomas von Essen, that they heard sounds of explosions. They saw flashes of light. 118 of them hearing one, the other, or both, such as this firefighter. Somewhere around the middle of the World Trade Center, there's this orange and red flash coming out. It seemed like on television when they blow up these buildings. It seemed like it was going all the way around, like a belt, all these explosions. You can see this in controlled demolition on the left, falling rapidly at near freefall acceleration. Is there any similarity? Enough to warrant a new investigation into the possible use of explosives? Maybe so. Saw a number of brief light sources being emitted between floors 10 and 15. Why are they seeing light sources well down below the fire floors? I saw low-level flashes. With each popping sound, initially an orange and then a red flash came out of the building. Then it would just go around the floors on all sides. What are we seeing here on the South Tower? Is it similar to a controlled demolition on the left? Given that no steel frame high-rise has ever collapsed due to fire, is it prudent to at least analyze the hypothesis of explosive controlled demolition, given that it looks exactly like one? I saw a flash, flash, flash. Then it looked like the building came down. I thought the terrorists planted explosives somewhere. That's how loud it was, a crackling explosive. All of these witnesses were reported to NIST. None of them were reported in the final report by NIST. What did these guys say?
Floor by floor, instead of popping out.
It was if they had detonated.
Detonated.
They were planned to take down a building. Boom, 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 boom.
All the way down.
Mr. Mohr, 2 minutes in response.
Okay, I actually think that our eyewitness accounts can give us some very good evidence for natural collapse. First of all, 72% of them, as you can see on the slide that's about to come up, smelled jet fuel in the stairwells, and that's a very, very important fact. But what I think is most important is the randomness of the eyewitness accounts. If there were a controlled demolition, there would be, along with it, there would be a pattern to this. The people would be seeing and hearing the same kinds of things. The eyewitnesses' accounts of explosions talk about fireballs. It talks about little flashes of light, the ground shaking with no other apparent effect or no change in the structure. People like eyewitness Philip Morell explained the cause of the ground shaking in the basement, which he first thought may have been some kind of explosion, as a freight elevator crashing. And that, by the way, in 9/11 Mysteries, that part of it was edited out, I might add. Movies like that do edit out parts of the interviews sometimes. Other random explosions follow the appearance of white smoke. White smoke kills dozens of firefighters every year. And so we have a lot of problems with just saying that, yes, of course there were eyewitnesses that were reporting explosions, but the most important thing is that there's no seismic evidence of any major explosions. We have the seismic evidence shows 2 planes crashing into the buildings. Nothing. And then the two crashes and the collapses of the buildings. Those are seismic events that are major explosions. Explosions happen in fires all the time. Firefighters die from natural causes, from natural fire explosions of all different kinds. Firefighters' accounts, almost all of them, are of sounds around the collapse time and not before the collapse time. Some explosions from the fuel in the elevator shafts and in the basements, like I was talking about before. And we really do have to watch out for that white smoke. That is actually evidence, and it can sometimes be a not very hot smoke. That white smoke is something that happens right before an explosion and that has caused the tragic loss of life of many, many firefighters in our country.
Mr. Gage, 2 minutes.
In fact, we have
I'm sorry. This is
our
now the 1 minute back and forth.
In fact,
sorry about that, Mr. Timer.
In fact, Chris, there is plenty of evidence to suggest there were explosions before the jet plane impacts, as well as before the collapse of the towers. And these explosions that are occurring at the onset of destruction are uniform, evenly paced, and not as easily picked up by seismic devices.
Well, anything that's not picked up by these seismic devices, some of which actually, some of the portable seismic devices were right in the area, not far away, and then there was a major seismic device that was only 30 miles away. That was close enough. If they were not big enough to be registered on the seismic record, they're not big enough to cause a structural problem in the building.
Also, we have only one witness smelling kerosene throughout the building.
And the other 72% were smelling what?
I don't know what they were smelling.
That's what NIST says, that they were smelling jet fuel.
But I challenge your facts in that case.
That's because it came from NIST.
Well, we're going to have to leave it at that. Next question, and I again remind you, this order was agreed upon by both our debaters, is to Richard Gage. Molten steel, iron microspheres. You claim that there was molten metal below the wreckage piles and tiny iron microspheres found in the dust, both of which indicate a controlled demolition. Why couldn't these things happen from the fires in the towers?
Well, let's take a look. In fact, this is another point of evidence for explosive controlled demolition, because we do not have the heat that's capable of developing molten iron or steel pouring out of the South Tower 10 minutes prior to its collapse. This is clearly not any other metal than iron or steel, because we know because of the color. Aluminum from the jet planes is what we were told by NIST, and yet what happens when we have melted airplane is that it's silvery in color. It doesn't glow bright orange like that. So we know this is not aluminum from the jet plane. Who's attributed to have said after 21 days after the attack, the fires were still burning and molten metal was still running? Leslie Robertson. His associate, Richard Garlock, says the debris past the columns was red hot, molten, running. Red hot steel being pulled from deep within the pile. Literally molten steel, says the president of the company. Steel flowed in molten streams. Molten steel at the heart of the tower's remains. And these gentlemen, what did they experience?
See, molten steel running down the channel rails. Like you're in a foundry.
Yeah, like lava.
Like lava.
From a volcano.
Structural engineers like Abelhaz and Astani documented the melting of girders in the debris pile, in this case under World Trade Center 7. FEMA, the original writer of the first report, the BPAT report came out in May of 2002, documents the melting of steel with hot sulfur corrosion attack. Steel takes, as my opponent mentioned, 2,700 degrees to melt. The fires and the jet fuel, which is only kerosene basically, can only get to be about 1,600 degrees. That's it. It doesn't melt steel, making it look like Swiss cheese. We have rapid oxidation, sulfidation, hot sulfur, molten iron, they document. not even melted steel, invading the grain boundaries of the steel.
Mr. Gage, time up.